David Carter, a 42-year-old single father, had dedicated his life to raising his daughter, Emma. Ever since his wife passed away when Emma was just a child, he had made sure she never felt alone. He built a life around her, ensuring she had everything she needed: love, support, and stability. Because of this, David never thought much about himself, especially when it came to relationships. He had dated a little over the years, but nothing serious ever came of it. His focus had always been on Emma. Emma, now 24, was a smart and independent young woman. She had a bright personality, a successful job, and a strong bond with her father. One of the most important people in her life was Lily, her best friend since high school. Lily had been part of their world for years, often spending weekends at their house, sharing secrets with Emma, and even considering David like family. To David, Lily had always been just a kid, a sweet girl who was Emma's best friend, nothing more. He had watched her grow up, but he never really saw her. That changed one evening when Emma invited Lily over for the weekend. It was a warm Friday night and the house was filled with laughter. Emma and Lily sat in the living room, catching up on their lives, watching movies, and reminiscing about their teenage years. David, as usual, kept to himself in the kitchen, sipping his coffee and reading a book. He had gotten used to these visits. He was always the quiet observer while the girls enjoyed their time together. But this time, something was different. As he glanced over at Lily, he noticed something he hadn't before. She wasn't the same girl who used to run around in oversized hoodies and sneakers. She was now a 23-year-old woman, confident, elegant, and undeniably beautiful. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her shoulders, and her bright eyes sparkled with intelligence and charm. Her laugh was soft yet captivating, and there was a maturity in her presence that David had never noticed before. When did she change? He wondered, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. At one point, Emma excused herself to take a phone call, leaving David and Lily alone in the room. "You always sit alone when we're here," Lily said, tilting her head and smiling. David chuckled. "Well, it's your girls' night. I don't want to interrupt." "You never interrupt. I think you like staying in your own world," she teased, leaning back against the couch. "What are you reading?" He held up his book, showing her the cover. Just an old classic. Nothing exciting. Lily got up and walked over, sitting across from him at the kitchen counter. "You always say that, but I bet it's interesting." David couldn't help but smile. He had always liked Lily's curiosity and the way she asked questions with genuine interest. But this time he also noticed how close she was sitting, how her voice had a softer tone, how her eyes held something unspoken. Then it hit him: he was noticing her. And that realization made his stomach twist. What was wrong with him? This was Lily, his daughter's best friend. He wasn't supposed to feel anything beyond familiarity and kindness toward her. Yet, something deep inside him stirred, something he hadn't felt in years. He quickly pushed the thought away. "So how's life treating you?" he asked, trying to steer the conversation to safer ground. Lily smiled, resting her chin on her hand. "Busy, but good. Work keeps me occupied, but I always love coming here. It feels like home." David nodded. "That's good to hear." At that moment, Emma returned, ending their conversation. But as the night went on, David couldn't shake off the strange feeling inside him. For the first time, he found himself looking at Lily differently. He noticed how she carried herself, how her voice had a certain warmth, how she made him feel something he wasn't sure he was ready to admit. When he went to bed that night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He tried to convince himself that it was just a passing thought, a trick of the mind. But deep down, he knew the truth: something had changed. And whether he liked it or not, he had crossed into dangerous territory. What he didn't know was that this was just the beginning. David couldn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of his conversation with Lily. It wasn't anything inappropriate, just friendly talk. Yet something about it had felt different, something he couldn't ignore. "Why am I thinking like this?" he asked himself. "She's Emma's best friend. I've known her since she was a teenager." But no matter how hard he tried to push the thoughts away, they stayed. He wasn't blind. He had seen how much Lily had changed over the years. She wasn't a child anymore. She was a confident, intelligent young woman. And the way she spoke to him, the way she looked at him tonight. Was it just his imagination, or was there something there? The next morning, David woke up early, hoping to shake off his thoughts. He headed to the kitchen to make coffee, focusing on the simple routine to clear his mind. He had to remind himself that this was nothing, just a passing moment of confusion. As he poured his coffee, he heard soft footsteps behind him. "Morning, Mr. Carter." That voice, gentle yet playful. He turned around to see Lily standing there in a loose t-shirt and shorts, her hair slightly messy from sleep. His breath hitched for a second, but he quickly composed himself. "Morning, Lily," he said, forcing a casual tone. She smirked. "Emma's still sleeping. I didn't want to wake her up, so I thought I'd come get some coffee." David nodded and handed her a mug. Their fingers brushed for a split second, and a strange jolt ran through him. He immediately stepped back, pretending not to notice. Lily, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease. She leaned against the counter, taking a sip of coffee, her eyes studying him curiously. "You know what," she said, tilting her head, "you've always been different from other dads." David raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" She shrugged. "I don't know. Most dads are either super strict or completely awkward around their daughter's friends. But you've always been cool. Smart. Easy to talk to." He chuckled, trying to ignore the way his heart was beating a little too fast. "That's just because I don't say much." Lily smiled. "Exactly, you listen." David shifted uncomfortably. Was this just friendly banter? Or was there something more in her words? Before he could respond, Lily took another sip of coffee and locked eyes with him. "You know, I used to have a little crush on you when I was younger." His breath caught in his throat. She said it so casually, like it was nothing, but to him, it was everything. He forced a laugh. "Lily, come on. That's just a silly teenage thing." She smirked. "Maybe. But who says it ever really went away?" David felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. This was dangerous. This was wrong. He needed to put an end to it before things got out of control. "Lily," he started, but she cut him off with a soft laugh. "Relax, David. I'm just teasing." She set her mug down and walked past him, but before leaving the kitchen she turned back. "Or maybe I'm not." And with that she was gone. David stood there, gripping his coffee mug tightly, his mind spinning. What just happened? Was she playing with him, or was she serious? And more importantly, why did he want her to be serious? For the rest of the day, he tried to act normal, but it wasn't easy. Every time Lily walked into the room, he felt her presence like a magnet pulling him in. She was acting the same as always, laughing with Emma, chatting about random things, but every now and then, he caught her glancing at him, her eyes lingering just a second too long. And each time it made his heart race. That night, after Emma went to bed, David was in his study, trying to read, but the words on the page blurred together. Then there was a soft knock at the door. He turned to see Lily standing there. "Can't sleep?" he asked, setting his book down. She shook her head. "No. Thought I'd come bother you." David swallowed hard. "Lily, I don't think that's a good idea." She stepped inside anyway, leaning against the doorway. "Why not?" He looked at her, his mind screaming at him to stop whatever this was, but his heart was saying something else entirely. And for the first time in years, David wasn't sure which one he should listen to. David had always prided himself on being a man of control. He was responsible, logical, and never let emotions cloud his judgment. But right now, as Lily stood in the doorway of his study, he felt anything but in control. She was looking at him with an expression that made his pulse quicken, curious, playful, and maybe something more. "Lily," he said carefully, sitting up in his chair, "you shouldn't be here this late." She raised an eyebrow. "Why? Afraid someone will see us?" He exhaled sharply, trying to compose himself. "Afraid that this is heading somewhere it shouldn't." Lily smirked, stepping inside and closing the door softly behind her. "David," she said, her voice gentle but teasing, "I'm not a kid anymore." "I know that," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "That's the problem." Lily tilted her head, studying him. "So you do feel something?" David clenched his jaw. This was exactly what he had been trying to avoid. He had hoped his attraction to Lily was just a fleeting moment, a trick of the mind that would pass. But it hadn't. If anything, it had only grown stronger with every passing hour. He had spent the entire day avoiding her, hoping the feelings would disappear. But every time she laughed, every time she looked at him with those knowing eyes, it only got worse. And now, with her standing there in the dimly lit study, looking at him like that, it was dangerous. It was wrong. But he wanted it. "Lily," he said, standing up, "I'm your best friend's father." She took a step closer. "And I'm your daughter's best friend." David swallowed. "Exactly." She gave a small, knowing smile. "So that means we should pretend there's nothing between us." "There is nothing between us," he said quickly, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. Lily took another step forward, closing the space between them. "Then why are you looking at me like that?" David didn't have an answer, or rather he had one, but he was too afraid to say it. The silence between them was heavy, charged with tension. He could feel the warmth of her body just inches from his, smell the faint scent of vanilla and jasmine from her skin. "Tell me to leave," she whispered. "If you really don't feel anything, tell me to go." His throat was dry. His mind screamed at him to stop this before it went too far. But his heart, his stupid, reckless heart, was beating so hard he could barely think. He should have said the words. He should have told her to walk away. But instead he did the one thing he knew he shouldn't do. He reached out. His fingers brushed against her arm, barely a touch, but enough to send a shiver down his spine. Enough to make her eyes darken with something he couldn't ignore. And then, before he could stop himself, before he could think about all the reasons why this was a mistake, he kissed her. It was soft at first, hesitant, like he was testing the waters, giving himself one last chance to pull away. But when Lily responded, when she wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed closer, his restraint shattered. He deepened the kiss, his hands tangling in her hair as months of hidden desire broke free. She tasted sweet, intoxicating, and he was drowning in her. For a moment, there was no guilt, no fear, just her, warm, soft, real. Then reality crashed down. David pulled away abruptly, breathing hard. This can't happen." Lily looked up at him, her lips slightly swollen from the kiss. "Why not?" He ran a hand over his face, stepping back. "Because it's wrong. Because Emma." Lily sighed. "Emma doesn't control my life, David, and she doesn't control yours either. She wouldn't understand." "Maybe not," Lily admitted. "But do you understand what you're feeling?" David hesitated. He didn't. Not really. All he knew was that something had changed between them, and there was no going back. Lily reached out, touching his arm. "I don't want to make things complicated for you, David, but I'm not going to pretend I don't feel something, and neither should you." He wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her this was a mistake. But when he looked into her eyes, he knew he'd already lost that battle, because the truth was, he didn't want to pretend either. David barely slept that night. His mind replayed the kiss with Lily over and over, each memory burning into him like fire. He had spent years being careful, responsible, always making the right choices, but last night, in a moment of weakness, he had crossed a line he could never uncross. He told himself it was a mistake, that he needed to forget it ever happened, that he needed to stay away from Lily before things spiraled even further out of control. But deep down, he knew the truth. He didn't want to stay away. The next morning, David forced himself to act normal as he made breakfast. Emma was still in her room, but Lily walked in just as he was pouring himself a cup of coffee. Their eyes met. It was only for a second, but that second held everything. Last night's kiss, the desire that still lingered, the silent question of what happens now. David cleared his throat and quickly looked away. "Morning," he said, keeping his voice as neutral as possible. "Morning," Lily replied, grabbing a glass of water. Silence filled the kitchen. Not the usual comfortable silence, but something heavy and charged. David focused on flipping the eggs in the pan, pretending like everything was fine. But then Lily spoke again, her voice quiet. "Are we going to talk about it?" David stiffened. He knew what she meant, but he shook his head. "There's nothing to talk about." Lily sighed, setting her glass down. "David, come on. You can't just pretend it didn't happen." "Yes, I can," he said firmly, turning to face her. "And so can you." She folded her arms, her eyes searching his. "Do you want to pretend?" He didn't answer, because if he did, he'd have to tell the truth. And the truth was dangerous. Before either of them could say more, Emma's voice called from upstairs. "Lily, you up?" Lily glanced toward the stairs, then back at David. She held his gaze for a moment, then gave him a small, knowing smile. "This isn't over," she whispered, before walking away. David exhaled sharply, gripping the counter. No, it wasn't over. And that was the problem. The next few days were torture. Lily didn't push him in front of Emma, but when they were alone, she was different. Subtle touches, lingering glances, soft smiles that sent his heart racing. David tried to ignore it, but she was making it impossible. One evening, after Emma had gone out with some friends, David found himself alone in the house with Lily again. He had planned to stay in his office, keep his distance. But when he walked into the living room to grab his phone, Lily was there, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine. "Emma's out?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. Lily nodded, swirling the wine in her glass. "Yep. Looks like it's just us." David hesitated. He should leave. He should go back to his office and lock the door. But he didn't. Instead, he sat down in the chair across from her. "Lily," he started, whatever this is, it has to stop." She raised an eyebrow. "Why?" He sighed. "You know why." Lily set her glass down and leaned forward. "Do you regret it?" David opened his mouth to say yes, but the word wouldn't come out. Lily's lips curved into a small smile. "That's what I thought." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Lily, I can't do this. You're Emma's best friend. If she ever found out..." "She won't," Lily interrupted. "Not unless you tell her." David looked at her, his chest tightening. "I don't want to hurt her." "And you think I do?" Lily's voice softened. "Emma means the world to me. But so do you." His breath caught. She stood up, slowly walking over to where he sat. "I know this is complicated, and I know you're scared. But tell me, David, if Emma wasn't part of the equation, would you still be fighting this?" David swallowed hard, because the answer was no. If there was no Emma, if there were no consequences, he wouldn't be fighting it at all. Lily knelt in front of him, placing a hand on his knee. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. "Just feel." And then she kissed him again. This time David didn't pull away. This time he let himself fall. David had always thought of himself as a man of reason, a man who did the right thing, no matter how hard it was. But now, as he sat on the couch with Lily pressed against him, her lips warm and urgent against his, he felt all his reason slipping away. He should have stopped her. He should have pushed her away before things went too far. But he didn't. Instead, his hands found their way to her waist, pulling her closer as he deepened the kiss. She sighed softly, her fingers tangling in his hair, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not Emma. Not the consequences, not the guilt that was sure to come later. For now, there was only this. Only her. The world outside faded as he lost himself in her touch. The way her lips fit perfectly with his, the way her body pressed against him like it belonged there. It had been so long since David had felt this way, so alive, so wanted. But then, reality came crashing down. A loud noise from outside startled them both, making them jump apart. David's breathing was ragged as he ran a hand through his hair, trying to regain control. Lily, still flushed, looked at him with a mix of desire and frustration. "David," she whispered, reaching for him again. But he stood up quickly, shaking his head. "No, this is a mistake." Lily frowned. "A mistake?" He turned away, rubbing his temples. "It can't happen again." She exhaled sharply, standing up too. "You keep saying that, but then it does happen again." David turned to face her, his chest tight. "Because I lose control around you." Lily's expression softened. "Then maybe that means something." "It means trouble," he said firmly. "It means hurting Emma. It means making a mess of both our lives." Lily crossed her arms. "You're acting like this is some scandalous affair. I'm not some teenager with a crush, David. I'm a grown woman, and I know what I want." He let out a bitter laugh. "And what do you want?" She took a step closer. "You." David's breath caught. "I've felt this way for a long time," she admitted. "But I didn't think you'd ever see me as anything more than Emma's friend." He closed his eyes. "Lily, I can't or won't," she challenged. David opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out, because the truth was he didn't know anymore. He wanted her. That was undeniable. But wanting her and having her were two very different things. We have to stop, he finally said, his voice quieter now. Lily's face fell. So that's it? You're just going to pretend none of this happened. It shouldn't have happened, he corrected. She studied him for a long moment, then sighed, stepping back. Fine, she said, her voice laced with disappointment. If that's really what you want. David didn't answer, because saying yes would be a lie. Lily grabbed her phone from the coffee table and turned toward the stairs. But before she left the room, she glanced back at him one last time. For what it's worth, she said softly, I think you're making a mistake. And then she was gone. David sat back down, dropping his head into his hands. This was a disaster waiting to happen. And the worst part? He wasn't sure he had the strength to stop it. David spent the next few days trying to act normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. He buried himself in work, forced himself to focus on anything other than her. But no matter how hard he tried, Lily was always there, in his thoughts, in his dreams, in every stolen glance when she walked into the room. She was still staying at the house, still Emma's best friend, but something had changed between them. There were no more teasing words, no more lingering touches. Instead, there was tension, thick and undeniable. Lily was keeping her distance now, and it should have been a relief. It wasn't. David hated the coldness, the way she no longer smiled at him the way she used to. He told himself this was for the best, that it had to be this way. But why did it feel like he was losing something? One evening, Emma and Lily were sitting in the living room, laughing over something on TV. David was in the kitchen, pretending to be busy, but he couldn't stop himself from listening to their conversation. It was normal, comfortable, the way it should be. Then Emma suddenly said, Hey Dad, you should date again. David nearly dropped the glass he was holding. What? Emma grinned. I mean seriously, you never go out. You never even try to meet anyone. David forced a chuckle. I'm fine the way I am. Lily was silent, but he felt her eyes on him. Emma sighed dramatically. Come on, there's gotta be someone you like. Someone interesting. David hesitated. His gaze flickered toward Lily for the briefest second, so quick he wasn't even sure if she noticed. But she did. Her lips parted slightly, and for a moment he saw something there, something unspoken. Emma groaned. Fine, be a boring old man forever. David forced himself to smile. Glad you approve. But inside, his chest was tight. Later that night, when Emma had gone to bed, David sat alone on the back patio, sipping a glass of whiskey. He stared at the stars, lost in thought, when he heard the sliding door open behind him. Lily. She didn't say anything as she walked over and sat down beside him. For a long moment they just sat there in silence, the only sound the distant chirping of crickets. Finally, she spoke. You meant it, didn't you? David turned to her. Meant what? When you said you were fine being alone. He sighed, looking down at his glass. It's easier that way. Lily shook her head. That's not true. You're just scared. His jaw tightened. Scared of what? She turned toward him, her gaze steady. Of what happens if you let yourself want something you think you can't have. His breath hitched. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The tension was unbearable, crackling like fire between them. Lily, he finally said, his voice low, I don't want to hurt you. She gave a sad smile. You're already hurting me, David. Just in a different way. He looked away. Emma. I know, Lily interrupted softly. She wouldn't understand, and I don't want to lose her either. David exhaled shakily. Then we can't. Then tell me you don't want me, she challenged. Look me in the eyes and say it. David turned to her, ready to say the words. But he couldn't, because it would be a lie. Lily reached for his hand, her touch warm and steady. You don't have to keep fighting this, she whispered. I know you feel it too. David swallowed hard. He did. God help him, he did. But was wanting her enough? Could he risk everything for something that might destroy them both? As he looked at her, waiting for his answer, he realized he was running out of time. One way or another, he had to decide. David felt trapped between two forces, his heart and his mind. His heart screamed at him to stop pretending, to stop denying what was so painfully obvious. But his mind, the part of him that had always been logical and responsible, knew the risks. Lily was looking at him with so much hope, so much vulnerability. She was waiting for him to say something, anything. But he had no words. He pulled his hand away slowly, standing up from the patio chair. Lily, this isn't about what I want. She frowned, standing as well. Then what is it about? David turned away, staring out at the darkened yard. It's about her. Emma? Lily said softly. He nodded. She trusts me. She trusts you. And if she ever found out, he exhaled sharply, it would break her. Lily hesitated, her face filled with emotion. You think she'd hate us? David let out a bitter laugh. I think she'd feel betrayed, and she'd have every right to. Lily crossed her arms. So what? We just pretend none of this happened? That we don't feel anything? David turned to face her, his chest tight. I don't know what else to do. She swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you love me? The question hit him like a punch to the gut. Love. Was that what this was? David had spent weeks trying to ignore his feelings, pushing them aside as something fleeting, but deep down he knew the truth. This wasn't just attraction, it wasn't just desire. It was her. She had snuck into his life, into his heart, and now he couldn't imagine a world without her. But love wasn't always enough. He looked at her, his heart aching. It doesn't matter. Lily's eyes filled with hurt. Of course it matters. David clenched his jaw. Even if I say yes, what does that change? We still can't be together. Lily's expression hardened. No, you won't let us be together. David looked away, unable to argue. A long silence stretched between them. Then Lily took a deep breath, stepping back. I can't do this anymore, David. I can't keep waiting for you to choose me. His heart pounded. Lily. No, she cut him off, shaking her head. I deserve someone who isn't afraid to love me, who wants to be with me no matter what. David felt something inside him crack. She turned toward the house. I'll be gone in the morning. His stomach dropped. You're leaving. She nodded. I think it's for the best. David wanted to stop her. He wanted to tell her he would fight for this, fight for her. But the words wouldn't come. Because as much as he loved her, he was still too afraid. Lily looked at him one last time. Goodbye, David. And just like that, she was gone. The next morning, David woke up to silence. Emma was still asleep, but Lily's room was empty. She had really left. He stood in the doorway, staring at the neatly made bed, his chest tight with regret. He had let her go. And now he wasn't sure if he'd ever get her back. Days passed, then weeks. Lily didn't return. Emma mentioned once that Lily had gone to visit family in another city. David didn't ask questions. He didn't want Emma to suspect anything, but inside he was a mess. Everywhere he looked he saw her. The way she laughed, the way she challenged him, the way she made him feel alive in a way he hadn't in years. And he had let it slip through his fingers. One night, as he sat alone in his study, David finally admitted the truth to himself. He did love her, and he had made the worst mistake of his life by letting her go. But was it too late to fix it? He grabbed his phone, his hands shaking slightly. He hesitated, then finally dialed her number. It rang once, twice. Then, to his surprise, she answered. David. His breath caught at the sound of her voice. Lily. There was silence on the other end. Then softly she asked, Why are you calling? David closed his eyes. Because he was done being afraid. Because he was ready to fight for her. Because he couldn't lose her. He took a deep breath. Because I love you.